today's the day I'm going to rank every aggressive opening there is. And I guarantee you I'm going to offend some people. And to start out, I have the King's Gambit, very popular opening. This comes after we go pawn to e4 here, black goes e5, and now f4. We put pressure on them immediately. The main point of this is that after they capture, we can play knight to f3, and we're going to get a ton of development really fast. Let's say black plays knight to c6. We can go bishop c4, quickly castle, take the whole center with pawn to d4, and we have a super fun and aggressive game. And at the beginner level, this thing is like a 10-foot gargantuan monster. This thing is super strong. But higher than that, loses a lot of its steam. If they know a good reply here, like a g5 or d5 or bishop e7, your position is going to be very mediocre, not that fun, and the best you can get is a slightly worse game. Overall, though, I still think this is very, very good. Where it's going to go, I think it bounces out to A tier. Very, very fun, though. England Gambit I have next. Oh, this is a fun one. This comes after white plays pawn to d4 here, and we go pawn to e5. There's not really much of a plan here. After white captures, I guess the plan would be knight to c6, and we can attack the pawn. The only redeeming quality here is after like knight to f3. We can go queen to e7, and there is like one trap after bishop to f4. We can play queen to b4 check. We do get one fun fork, but after bishop d2 here, and we take the pawn, if they know what they're doing, they'll play knight to c3, and your game is already just miserable. Bishop c3 will be the trap here, at which point bishop b4, you are winning, but this is very, very rare and simply not that good. But even back here, your position is just not that great. To be fair, though, there are probably some good pawn to d6 and f6 variations where you can get a half decent game, but overall the England is very, very weak. However, there's not like completely nothing there, so I think E tier is where it belongs. Ooh, next up I have the Stafford Gambit. Somewhere in the skies, Eric Rosen is smiling. This comes after white goes pawn to e4, we go pawn to e5, knight to f3 attacking, knight to f6, the Petrov's defense. They capture, and instead of capturing back or playing like d6, the main line, we go knight to c6. Point being, after they capture, and we take back, although we're down a pawn here, after white plays like d3 to defend, our goal here is not to try and win it back. We're going to play bishop c5, castle, or potentially play like h5 here, and knight g4, and there are a ton of super fun aggressive traps here, like a lot of them. However, if white knows exactly what they're doing, they'll play like c3 here, d4, and our position is borderline lost, which sadly is not that great. However, this thing is still super fun with a ton of tricks and traps, and overall, I think it's going to go right into the B tier. Next up, we have the Wing Gambit. This comes after black here plays, we go pawn to e4, black goes c5, the Sicilian defense, and now we play b4, just trying to get black's pawn right out of the center. The point here, I guess, is that after they capture, we can play d4, try to take the center, or potentially a3, and attack them like this. We just don't really get enough compensation in return. In this variation, if they know the key move here, d5, your position is not that good. And if we play like back here, instead d4, then they can play pawn to d5 once again, or e6. We're not really getting the pawn back, and in return for the center, it's just not quite enough. There is definitely some fun still in this gambit. However, overall, it's not too strong, and I think either D or C, I think C tier is where I'm going to put it. Oh, next up, I have the Vienna Gambit. I won't spoil anything yet. This comes after e4, once again. Black goes e5, knight to c3 is the Vienna game, and after black goes knight to f6, we can play f4 here. This gambit is incredible. First off, if they capture, which at the beginner level, basically everyone does, you go e5 here. You're basically already like winning the game. They have no safe squares, meaning they have to back their knight up to g8. You can now play knight to f3 here, go d4, win the pawn back, your game is just completely dominating. Your center is just incredible. If they play anything else, you're just going to develop easily too. Bishop c4, knight to f3, you are completely dominating. There really is no downside here. I guess their best variation, instead of capturing, can get a bit dangerous, but if you know what you're doing, you're still going to be doing very, very well in these lines with a lot of aggressive play. Overall, this is one of my favorite gambits, if not just one of my favorite openings as a whole, and I think it has nowhere else to go but into the S tier. Next one, I have the Traxler. This is a very, very fun one. This comes after once again, you get e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6, and knight to g5. White tries to fried liver us, and we play bishop c5. These variations get pretty insane. The point here is that if they take for the knight, try to fork us, we can play bishop takes f2 check, and after they capture, we can play knight takes on e4 here, and now our queen is getting in, even though we're still losing our rook. These variations are completely insane, and if it was just like this, then this would be probably very, very high. However, my problem with it is that they can play two things. One, if they play king to f1 here, most of the time they're going to get a big leg up in this variation, and you have to know exactly what you are doing. And also back here, instead of taking with the knight, they can take with the bishop, at which point after king to e7, a lot of your fun is simply not in the game. However, overall, this is still extremely deadly with a ton of fun, and overall, deciding between B and A, I think I'm going to put it into the B tier. Next up, Blackburn Shilling Gambit. Oh boy, this comes after once again, e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop c4, Italian game, and we play knight to d4 here. This is kind of like the England gambit, where the only point here is we have one trap. After they take on e5, we can play queen to g5 here, attack their knight, attack the pawn. If they make the unfortunate mistake of taking with the knight, then queen takes in g2, and we have the following variation, rook to f1, we play this check, bishop backs up, and knight to f3 with a very nice smothered checkmate. That trap is awesome, but other than the trap, this opening is just not that great. For one, back here, most people are just going to castle or play knight takes on d4, at which point your position isn't horrible, you're not down in material, but your pawn sucks on d4 here. They have more development, and you're probably going to get an okay game, but in my opinion, it just doesn't make that much sense. Overall, where to put the Blackburn Shilling, I think D tier is the perfect spot for it. Next up, Tumbleweed Gambit. Oh boy, this one comes after King's Gambit, after e4, e5, and pawn to f4, and after the capture, king to f2. I really don't even know what to say. This thing is just completely horrible. Kind of like a bomb cloud. They have many ways to get advantage here. Most, importantly, this check. We're already completely lost. G3 here, I guess, is the best try, but after captures, king g2, we can't even capture back because then we lose the rook. King g2 here, and then they can take another pawn, and this is a complete disaster of the opening. This can go nowhere but F tier. Next up, Muzio Gambit. This is a very, very fun one. This comes after actually King's Gambit once again here. They're going to capture knight to f3, and they play g5 here, the main line. We play bishop c4, g4, attacking our knight, and here we don't move the knight, we simply castle. Oh, this is very, very fun. The idea is after takes and takes, although we are down a full piece here, we have 3 pieces all pointed towards their king. They have to be extremely careful not to lose immediately, like a very normal move like knight c6 here. Queen takes f4, and they're going to get murdered in so many ways, and we can then go c3, d4, just take control of the entire game. We're down a piece, but it does not matter. Yeah, if they know what they're doing, you are sadly going to have a worse game. However, this is still extremely fun, and I think can go nowhere except into the A tier. Next up, I have the Danish Gambit. Very, very fun one. This comes after e4, e5, e4, e5 here, d4, they capture, and now c3. Point being, after the capture back, you can take immediately, but for the true Danish gambit, you're going to play bishop c4, captures, captures, and now this position, you're down 2 pawns, but you have 2 absolutely merciless and murderous bishops. You're going to quickly develop your knights out, castle, and there are a lot of ways that black can lose here. At the beginner level, this thing is an absolute monster. Higher than that, though, it loses some steam with various bishop b4s, and also some things like the d5 here, and, or sorry, not in this position, sorry, back in one of these positions, you play d5, or black can play d5, and your advantage just kind of entirely goes away. So overall, it's definitely good, especially for beginners, but higher than that, it's not super great. I think C tier is where it belongs. Next up, I have the fried liver attack. That's, by the way, a fried chicken, not fried liver, in case you were wondering. This comes after e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6 here, bishop to c4, knight to f6. We play knight to g5 here, attacking f7. A lot of people think this is the fried liver. The true fried liver is d5 here, we capture, and knight takes on d5, at which point you can play the savage move, knight takes f7. You are completely dominating here. The point is you're forking them, so they must capture, and now queen to f3. And this is really, really bad. Most people are just going to back their king up to e8, at which point bishop takes. You're now up a pawn. They cannot castle. You're already threatening another checkmate, and you were just murdering them. If they drop the king back to e6, well, then bishop takes d5. You get a checkmate, and that's also just completely winning. King to e6 is their best move, but I mean, oh my god, is this dangerous? You can now play knight to c3. You are still completely winning here, and they now have to deal with an absolute onslaught. I guess they can survive if they play perfectly, but they're not going to. And I think this can go really nowhere else but into the S tier. Next up, Halloween Gambit, a very, very interesting one. After e4, e5, knight to f3 here, knight to c6, and here, not bishop c4, we go knight to c3, knight to f6, the 4 knights game, and here we now sacrifice a knight on e5. Engine does not like it, but the point here is that after they take back the knight, we can go d4 and immediately overrun them in the center with e5, attacking their knight. All the squares are controlled, meaning they must back up to g8 here. And now, you have very many good ways to play. You can go bishop c4. My personal favorite is queen to f3. And although you are down a piece here, you're completely dominating the center, and black must play very carefully to not lose and try to consolidate their advantage. Very fun, but at the higher levels, people know exactly what to do, and you're basically already losing here. And so because of that, I think it goes to the B tier. Still very, very fun though. Next up, Budapest Gambit. I personally like this one. This comes after white goes pawn to d4 here. We go knight to f6, the Indian game, c4, and now e5 here. It looks like the England Gambit, but is much better because after they take back with the pawn, you can play knight to g4 here. You attack their pawn, and there are now various ideas here of f7 being very weak, bishop to b4 check, or bishop c5 here. I can't explain all the ideas, but trust me, this is actually a lot better than it looks right off the bat. Overall, at the higher level, it's still not super great, but it actually does hold its own a lot better than most people think. Overall, though, still not incredible. I think B tier is where it belongs. Next up, I have the Bong Cloud. Hikaru Nakamura is looking very, very nice right there in that photo. This comes after e4, e5, and king to e2. This thing is just absolutely wonderful. By getting your king out early, you are preparing for an early endgame. You do block out your pieces, and you cannot castle, but that's simply not important because who cares about your pieces anyway? This can go nowhere except into the S tier, and obviously it's the F tier. This thing is probably the worst opening ever, but it's still very, very funny. Next up, Evans Gambit. This comes after e4, e5, once again, not king e2. And now here, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop c4 Italian game, bishop c5, Gocho piano. Don't exactly know how to say that. Might be how you say that, might be not. In here, b4 is the Evans Gambit. The point is, by sacrificing the b pawn like this, you can very quickly go pawn to c3 and d4 here. If they back up to c5, d4, you're basically already winning. And there are a lot of completely insane sacrificing lines here, also with various castles and queen to b3s. A lot of super fun variations here. Once again, this opening has a lot to it. However, trust me when I say it is very, very powerful, and I think it very much belongs into the coveted S tier. Next up, Smith-Morra Gambit. This comes after e4 and c5, the Sicilian defense. And here we go, d4. They capture the pawn, and now c3. The point here is that after they take, and we take back with our knight. Although it doesn't look crazy, we're then going to start moving our pieces out with knight to f3 and bishop c4, and there are a lot of super fun and aggressive attacking lines here. And although black can defend in many ways, in my opinion, they don't seem to always fare out super well, and you can still get aggressive, super fun attacking games. At the highest level, yeah, it's not the best way to play, and overall is not the best way to play against the Sicilian as a whole, but I think this does not get flowers nearly as much as it should, and I think as a whole, it's going to go right into the A tier for me. Next up, Jerome Gambit. This is a very, very fun one. Comes after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, the Gocho piano. And here we sacrifice with bishop takes f7, king takes, knight takes e5 check, knight takes back. And we're down 2 pieces, but the point here is we can now play queen to h5. And yeah, we get a semi-aggressive position. We are attacking their king. However, we can't just checkmate them with only a queen after like king drops back to f8. We're just lost here. We can win 1 piece back, but I mean d6. This is just completely horrible. There is really nothing here. And although being very funny, objectively must go into the F tier because it is complete garbage. Next up, I have the Martial Attack. This comes after, for the black side, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. Now pawn to a6 here, bishop backs up to a4, knight f6, they're going to castle, bishop e7, we get some theory, rook to e1, we castle, c3, we now play pawn to b5, attack their bishop, they're going to back it up, and now pawn to d5 here, we strike in the center, and the point here is that after they capture us, we're going to capture, and they can now take on e5 here and win a pawn, but at the end of the day, we're going to play c6, go bishop d6 here, and their king is actually quite weak. There's going to be a ton of fun attacking lines here, and while it is super fun, in my opinion, something about it has just always irked me the wrong way. I'm not super in love with it. However, I do respect that it is still a very strong opening, and so I'm going to put it into the B tier. Next up, I have the the Irish Gambit. Oh god, this one is absolutely abominable. E4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now knight takes e5, just completely ignoring that they defended the pawn. I guess the idea here is after d4, they back the knight up. It's kind of like a scuffed Halloween Gambit, but it's worse in every way. Sacrificing a knight for 2 pawns in center is nowhere near worth it. This can go nowhere except the F tier. It is absolutely horrible. Next up, I have the Albin Gambit or Albin Counter Gambit after d4, d5, c4, Queen's Gambit, and e5. I see a lot of people talk about this one. However, in my opinion, there's one word for it: overrated. There's just not too much good stuff here. If they take the e5 pawn, which is their best move, we can push up to d4. The one trap here is if they play e3, you do have bishop e4 check. You can get the Lasker trap, which can be very fun, but most people are not going to do that. They're just going to play like knight to f3. And from here, after knight to c6, you're not really doing that great. White has many good ways to play. A3, G3, my personal favorite for the white side would be knight to B2, and this rotation. And your position just isn't that great. You have very tight pieces. Development is difficult. You have to go like this, and eventually you'll reach like this position. And After we take one more pawn, we're still down a pawn here, but white is in absolutely no danger, and we're just not really making that aggressive of a game here, or a very good one either. Overall, I'm going to put this probably into the D tier. I know that's a hot take, but that is what I think. Next up, Dragon Sicilian. This is a very, very fun one. This comes after e4, c5 Sicilian, and we get some moves: knight to f3, d6, d4, capture, capture, knight to f6 attacking, knight to c3 defending, and now g6. The point of this is that we're going to go bishop to g7 here. We're going to quickly castle, and from here we can go knight to c6 and probably strike in center with some form of d5 here. Meanwhile, your bishop is going to open up, and they actually have a lot of problems, especially on their queen side, because your bishop is going to become an absolute missile. A lot of people are also going to go for a long castle setup here with like a pawn to f3 and something like this. We get a position like so, at which point you're going to go on a gigantic attack. You're going to probably play some form of a rook to c8, move your bishop out, and there are a lot of sacrifices, also queen to a5. You're going to go on a gigantic attack here, and this opening really has no downsides. While it can be difficult sometimes, it is absolutely fantastic. Will it go into the S tier? I think it will. It is still really, really good. Next up, Latvian Gambit. This is an interesting one. E4, E5, like this, knight to F3, and here we play F5. First off, Engine really does not like it. It says knight takes E5 or pawn takes F5, and we're just completely losing here. However, with the benefit of the doubt, the point here is that after they take our pawn, we can try some moves. We can try to push up to attack their knight, but they can just move to the center. We're not really doing that great here. We can try to defend with queen to e7, but this isn't that great either. Pawn to d4, capture, and bishop e2, and this is looking pretty bad for us. And overall, I don't really see the appeal here. The only maybe trick here, after knight takes e5, we can go knight to f6, maybe some bishop c5 stuff, but it is not very good. It will always end up being very, very weak. And so overall, I think the Latvian Gambit is going to go into the either D or E tier. I think D tier. Next up, I have the Modern Scandinavian. This comes after e4, and we go pawn to d5, the Scandinavian. They capture, and knight to c6 here, not capturing right away, but knight to f6. The point is, we don't capture right away because, one, if they play knight to c3 here, then after we take and we get this is just an objectively better version of the Scandinavian. However, if they try to hold on with pawn to c4 here, you can then go e6, and this just translates into an absolutely murderous gambit. We have more development, more space in the center, and you're going to be just dominating them in many lines. You also have the very fun Portuguese gambit here after pawn to d4, and you can play bishop g4, and a lot of these lines get really, really crazy and super fun. If white knows what they're doing, they will end up with a bit of a better position. However, overall, this is still super, super fun and super, super good, and I think it's going to go into the A tier. Now I have the Grand Prix attack. This comes after e4, c5 Sicilian. We play knight to c3 to close Sicilian, and we're then going to play f4. I really like this opening. You control the center a lot, and usually going f4 in the Sicilian is bad, but because they cannot play d5 here, it's actually just really, really good for us. And after e6, our development is easy. We're going to move our pieces out. Bishop c4, d3, castle. Although it's not typical in the Sicilian, you end up with a lot of aggressive ways to play. Various f5s can get absolutely insane. Super, super fun position. Probably not the absolute best, but I think is super, super fun. I think B tier is a good fit. Next up, I have the Meitner Mises Gambit. This is, actually I won't spoil it, comes after e4, e5, knight to c3, the Vienna. We now get knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, and here we play queen to g4. And these lines are just so incredibly good. We attack g7. There are so many tricks here. First off, G7 is very hard to defend. Queen to F6 is the most natural move, and now I guess the official gambit comes after knight to D5. Even though you are down a pawn here and you cannot castle, black has no way to attack you, and they now have to deal with about 500 threats. The only move that does not lose immediately here is king to f8, which only occurs in like 20% of games. And now knight to h3 and d3, and you're potentially going to play c3 here, and like their queen's getting trapped. Complete disaster of an opening for them, and you are just doing so incredible in so many of these lines. If you cannot tell, this is going into the S tier. I actually ranked it as number 1 on my Gambit tier list, which I still completely agree with. That is incredible. Next up, I have the Yurosov Gambit. This comes after e4, e5, bishop c4 here, bishop's opening, knight to f6, and here we go pawn to d4. Just striking in the center immediately, and there are like no bad lines for us here. If they capture on e4, we can just take back with our pawn on e5 here. Their knight is now stranded. Very queen d5 ideas are absolutely murderous. You're doing great in all those variations. They can also try to take on d4 here, at which point you can play my favorite knight to f3 and go for this type of action. Just let them capture, because if they do, then castles, and this is getting really, really aggressive. A lot of fun line here. Objectively, not the best either. However, I still think it is very good, and I think it's going to go into the B tier. Next up, I have the O'Sullivan Gambit. This is a very, very interesting one. Comes after e4 here by white, like this. We play knight to f6, the Alekhine's defense, e5, knight d5 here, d4, and now b5 marks the O'Sullivan Gambit. You completely sacrifice the pawn, and objectively it's not the greatest, but here you now go c5, and there are so many tricky ideas with various queen to a5s and bishop e7. This is another one where I can't really explain all the variations, but there is a lot of tricky potential here and so many traps that white can fall for. If they know what they're doing, yeah, you're going to end up with a worse position, which is why this is not the greatest. However, I still think is pretty fun, and I think we'll then go into the C tier. Next up, I have the quadruple Muzio Gambit. This one is just complete bat crazy after e4, e5 here. I'm going to show you some moves that are going to change your whole perspective on chess and probably life too. Knight f3. Oh, sorry, what am I doing? Knight f3. Not pawn to f4 here. King's Gambit. They capture. Knight to f3. g5. Bishop c4. g4 here. We castle. This is the normal Muzio Gambit. Queen to f6. The Seurat defense. And here we play e5, sacrificing a pawn. Now bishop takes f7, sacrificing the bishop. And now we get the fourth sacrifice here with d4. Queen takes with check, and now bishop e3. First off, they cannot take with the bishop because they take with the queen, and we get a nice pin like so. And other than this, these positions are just completely insane. Black is up 7 points of material. 7 points. That is insane, but they're only a bit better according to the engine, because to actually find the way to win this position as black is extremely difficult. Their greed gets better of them. They take a 5th piece of material. Queen takes f4, and we're already winning here. Bishop d5, various ways to win. Their best try is the back up to queen to g7 or to f6, at which point you can take the check, knight to f6, and bishop d4 here. They're going to be forced to eventually lose a piece, because we can then move our knight into c3 and into e4. Objectively, yeah, not the best, but these positions are completely insane, and almost no other opening can even match the just complete insanity of its opening. Objectively, I cannot put it in S because it's not the best. However, it's going to go into A tier instead. Next up, I have the Dark Knight Gambit, Gotham's favorite, after e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop c4 here. And this is actually for the black side. Knight to f6, knight g5, the fried liver, and here we now play knight takes on e4. This is interesting. If they take on f7 for the knight, which is his most natural move, then queen to h4, this is very bad. They must play like queen to e2 here. Most natural move, g3, loses immediately to knight takes on g3, and that is getting pretty bad. Queen to e2 is their best move here, and now knight to d4, and they can survive, but they have to play very, very, very carefully. The problem I have with this is that if they know bishop takes on f7 instead, which is not the hardest move to find. Also, by the way, if they take our knight, then d5 and we fork them, we're slightly better. If they take an f7 with the bishop, then king to e7, d4, and our position is very, very bad here. We're basically already losing. However, it definitely has a lot of fun potential in it, and so I think is going to head right into the C tier. Next, I have the Alien Gambit, very, very new. Shout out to Witty Alien. This comes after e4, e5, or so I'm not, what am I talking about, e5, c6, Caro-Kann, d4, d5, knight to c3, captures, knight f6, knight to g5 here, and after h6, we're going to capture on f7. This is hard to rank because, practically speaking, this is fantastic. White wins like 70% of games here. However, if they know the move of pawn to c5, you're basically already lost here. I made a video on this a couple, like a week or two ago. Yeah, you're basically already lost here because you're down a piece. Black can always drop their king back, and you are just completely losing. However, if they don't know that, which like 95% of people don't, you're going to be dominating in so many of these lines, which makes it hard to rank. Overall, I think it balances out into a pretty good gambit, and I'm going to put it into the B tier. Next up, I have the Duras Gambit. This is a I don't really know what to say. You can make your own opinion about this one. It comes after e4, and here we go pawn to f5. It's not horrible. It's not horrible. People make this out to be worse than it is. It's definitely not good though. After white captures back, we must play knight to f6, and this is just not good. White can play d4 here. Just take the whole center. We can play d5, and here they can very easily hang on to the pawn. At which point, we can still develop with like knight to c6, but our development is very, very difficult and just not good. Or they can play knight to f3 and give us the pawn back, but still here bishop to d3, and they have a much better position because e5 is just a gigantic weakness for us. We cannot put any pieces here. Not good. However, I think is a little bit better than what people give it credit for, and I think as a result, I'm going to put it into the E tier. Next up, I have the Kitty Gambit, or Kitty Counter Gambit, after e4, e5, queen to h5, so you can already tell we're getting a very dignified and high quality gambit here, and we play knight to f6. We attack their queen. After they take the pawn, the idea is we go bishop b7. We can castle quickly. We can get a little bit extra development for the pawn. While it is a good gambit, like objectively speaking, it's just not. It's just kind of like weird because once against queen h5, so you can't really play this above like 800, and even then you have much better ways to deal with this, like knight to c6, just a better way of playing. Yeah, it's not bad, I guess. It's just kind of weird. I think as a result, I'm going to put it into the C tier. It's fine, but just kind of odd. Next up, I have the Trompowsky attack. Not a trumpet, however, that's what I put on there, because that is what it sounds like. Comes after we go pawn to d4, black goes knight to f6, and bishop g5 here. We put pressure on their knight right away, and the point here is that the main line, knight to e4, we back the bishop up, and in many of these variations, even not in main line as well, we're going to go f3 and push in the center of e4, like a d5 here. In this case, we can go e3, we can go f3 a little bit later, and there are a lot of fun attacking lines here. I think it's not super great, however, it definitely has some good stuff to it, and as a result, I'm going to put it into the B tier. Next up, I have the Yugoslav attack after we go pawn to e4 here, pawn to c5 Sicilian, and we get the dragon after knight to f3, d6, d4, capture, knight f6, knight c3, g6, the dragon variation, and here we now play pawn to f3. The point here is that after bishop g7, we can go bishop e3 and queen to d2 here, and we're going to go on a big attack on the king side. Pawn to g4, pawn to h4, h5, g5. Black must be pretty careful here. However, we also have to be equally careful because after knight to c6 here, we can long castle, If black is smart, they're going to launch a counterattack, which can also get very, very dangerous. A lot of stuff going on. However, this is a very, very fun variation. Super aggressive, super attacking. I really like it, and I think it has nowhere to go except into the S tier. Next up, I have the tall variation. Not tall like a person's tall, but tall like the world champion. This comes after e4, c6, Caro-Kann, d4, d5. We push into the center on e5, and after bishop to f5, the main line, we go h4. One good thing about it is it's very mysterious. If black does not know what they're doing in e6, we have a g4 trap, and we're already winning because their bishop is just completely trapped. Yeah, we're already winning a piece. We are completely won. If they do know what they're doing, though, we still are doing very, very well here with a lot of attacking lines. H5 is probably their best try to move open up this square for their bishop. But here, we can now play knight to f3. And this works as a very important square we can eventually move our knight onto or bishop onto later on, and although it's not super aggressive, is still a very good variation. Overall, I think this is fine, and I'm probably going to put it into the B tier. Next up, I have the Scotch game. After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and pawn to d4. A lot of potential attacks here. After they capture, you can take back right away in the traditional Scotch, or you can play in various gambits ways with like bishop c4 here, or potentially pawn c3, go for a goring. A lot of fun ways to play, and by keeping the tension like this, so much can happen, so many fun attacks and whatnot. Overall, it's very good. It's not the most special opening in the world, however, I still think is very quality, and I'm going to put it into the B tier. Next up, I have the Kann Sicilian. After e4, pawn to c5 here, like so. Now we get, what is it called? Knight to f3. We go pawn to e6, d4, trade in the center, and then a6 marks the Kann variation. This thing is absolutely wonderful. The point is, although it looks slow, you're controlling so many important squares, and from here, you're going to play probably queen to c7, and then go b5, and launch a sort of queen-side attack here, bishop to b7, and white has to be very careful. We can then play, this, knight to f6, potentially b5 here. A lot of stuff going on, however, it almost always favors us, and although our position looks odd, it is extremely solid, and white almost always has an extremely tough time breaking through. This variation, very, very good. I don't think it's quite S tier, but I definitely think it is A tier territory. Next up, I have the Birds opening. This is one of my personal favorites. Comes after, on the very first move, we go F4 here. A lot of people say this is bad, and for good reason. At the beginner level, people play F4, no clue what they're doing. However, if you know what you're doing, this thing is absolutely wonderful. The main idea here is we control f4, so after they play whatever, we can then go knight to f3, control e5 even more, pawn to b3, bishop to b2. It doesn't look like it, but we're going to get some absolutely gigantic attacks in this variation. I absolutely love it. I think it is severely underrated, and if there is a hot take, this is definitely it. I'm going to put the Birds opening into the S tier. And last up, we have what else could it be except for the famed Queen's Gambit. This comes after d4, d5, c4. Why am I even explaining this? You already know what it is and where it is going. Straight into the S tier. Extremely wonderful, so many fun attacks, and is probably one of White's absolute best openings. Alright, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more videos. Let me know if you disagreed or agreed with my list. Shout out to my members. I currently have 5 of them. Those are Hashirama, Ganesh R, Kalul Dilem, I may be completely butchering that, Fesameros Herkes of Versilia, I might be completely butchering that one too, and I Just Rizzed You Up Productions. Become a member to vote on future videos. Once again, have a great day, and I will see you next time.